Hello and welcome to my Throne of Thunder raid guide. My name is Aliena, and in this video I'll show you all you have to know about Lei Shen, the last boss in this new raid instance. We completed this fight with 2 tanks, 2 healers and 6 DPS, but similar raid configurations may work just as well. Lei Shen is a mechanics heavy encounter that is very dependent on movement and execution. This fight has 3 phases and 2 intermissions. When you get teleported to Lei Shen's platform, you will see 4 conduits, each of a corner of the platform. When Lei Shen is near a conduit, he gains an ability different for each conduit that your raid needs to deal with. If Lei Shen is not near a conduit, he'll AoE the raid with discharged energy. Taking a few ticks will be necessary occasionally, but you cannot tank him far away from a conduit for long. At the start of the fight, all conduits are level 1 and have 0 energy. When he's near a conduit, the conduit will steadily increase its energy bar. When the energy bar hits 100, the conduit will level up. Conduits can level up to 3. Both increased energy and a level up will increase the damage that the conduit abilities do by a lot. While a level 1 conduit with 5 energy will do barely any damage, a level 3 conduit ability will be very threatening to a raid member's life. The key to this encounter is to steadily level up all 4 conduits so none become too threatening. However, after each intermission, the currently highest energy conduit will be disabled for the rest of the encounter, which means you cannot level it any further, so you have to pick carefully which ones you want to disable and which ones you want to level up. Let's go over the different conduit abilities before getting into Lei Shen's toolkit. The North conduit uses Static Shock. This is cast on a random raid member. A blue arrow will appear over them and a circle around them. After 8 seconds, AoE damage is dealt split between everyone in the circle. An unleveled conduit with no energy will deal about 400k damage. However, a level 3 conduit can easily deal over 1,000,000 damage, so stacking up becomes increasingly important as the encounter progresses. The number of targets affected by Static Shock also increases as it levels up. The East conduit uses the Fusion Chain, which is basically a chain lightning ability that pops an ad for every player that gets hit by it. It's imperative to spread out during the Fusion Chain, so your raid only gets 1 ad. The Fusion Chain damage as well as the damage dealt by the ads increase as the conduit gains energy and levels up. The South conduit uses Overcharge, which shoots a random raid member and then emits an expanding energy wave that damages and stuns other raid members. However, if everyone stacks up right on the overcharged target, they will not get stunned. Overcharge damage goes up as the energy and level of the conduit increases. The number of targets picked for overcharge also increases as it levels up. Lastly, the West conduit uses Bouncing Bolt. This puts swirling circles on the ground that need to be intercepted by a raid member. If no raid member stands in the circle when the bolt hits, an ad will spawn and the bolt will bounce again. This needs to be avoided at all costs, as the Bouncing Bolt ads hit very hard. As the energy of this conduit increases, so will the damage of the Bouncing Bolt impact. When the level of the conduit increases, so does the amount of bolts that spawn. We chose to get the Fusion Chain highest in Phase 1, but let no conduit level up. In Phase 2, we leveled up Overcharge. This strategy seemed to work best for us, and I'll explain the tactics for this in detail, but if your raid has an easier time with a different order, then by all means change it up. When not engaged in combat, Lei Shen moves around from conduit to conduit on his platform. We pick him up when he is at the East conduit, the Fusion Chain. Have your tank make sure he is always near the conduit so your raid doesn't take AoE damage, and have the rest of your raid spread around the east quadrant of the room. His abilities in this phase are as follows. Decapitate, which is cast on the currently active tank and puts a 5-second debuff on them. After 5 seconds, a baseline of 3,000,000 damage is inflicted on the tank. However, that damage is decreased the further away the tank is from Lei Shen, so when it goes out, your other tank must taunt Lei Shen immediately, and the tank with Decapitate must sprint as far away from Lei Shen as they can. After Decapitate deals its damage, it leaves a 30-second debuff that increases physical damage taken by 100%, so the tank cannot resume tanking until it has fallen off. His next ability is Crushing Thunder. This calls lightning down on melee locations and inflicts continuous damage if stood in. Your melee must make sure to move out of those. His last ability is Thunderstruck. This is a lightning circle on the ground that inflicts 1,000,000 damage to anyone standing in its center, but decreases the further away from it you are. Your entire raid should make a good effort to always be far away from Thunderstrucks to decrease raid damage dealt. In this phase, your tanks must move Lei Shen from conduit to conduit. Since we wanted to disable the Diffusion Chain conduit, we let that one get to about 95 energy, but no level up. All other conduits we got to about 50 or 60 energy, again without any level ups. Once Lei Shen gets to 65% health, he'll start his first intermission. The intermissions are really the toughest part of this encounter and require a lot of coordination. Lei Shen will move to the middle of the platform, become unattackable, and supercharge all conduits, which levels them all up by 1. That means you'll have to deal with all Conduit abilities simultaneously, and they'll deal a lot more damage and happen more often. Bouncing bolts can happen in any quadrant, which is the main reason you'll have to split your raid into 4 groups, 2 groups of 3 and 2 groups of 2. How you split it is largely up to your raid composition. We had one quadrant with hybrids, a shadow priest and 2 elemental shamans that were able to heal themselves. One quadrant with soakers that could deal with static shock on their own, such as rogues and hunters, and then 2 quadrants that had a healer each. Every quadrant team must be prepared to deal with all abilities while split up. Each person on the team should pick a general area of the quadrant, like left or right, to intercept the bouncing bolts and avoid having both people run to the same one. This is especially important when you get more than one bouncing bolt in one quadrant. During this phase, your raid must remember to spread out when the timer for the fusion chain comes up. The adds deal a lot of damage in this phase, and any superfluous adds should be avoided at all costs. However, when static shock or overcharge occur in your quadrant, your team members must quickly stack up to avoid taking the stun, or, in static shock's case, a death. Static shock during intermission, if it's not soaked, requires at least 2 people stacked together. If there are 3 people in a quadrant, all 3 should stack. Personal defensive cooldowns as well as health stones, if available, should be used liberally during intermissions. The intermission lasts exactly 45 seconds. After that, Lei Shen will become active again and the raid must quickly gather in one quadrant. We chose the north, the static shock quadrant, to begin phase 2 in. The previously highest energy conduit will be disabled in this phase, and its corresponding quadrant is now inaccessible. For us, that means there was no more diffusion chain. All other conduits will reset their energy to 0. Lei Shen has completely different abilities in this phase, namely Fusion Slash, which deals 400k damage on its current threat target and knocks them back. In fact, it can knock them back so much that your current tank can fly off the platform, resulting in a death and most likely a wipe. To avoid this, tanks must watch the Fusion Slash timer and position themselves so they have the platform behind them, not the abyss. After a Fusion Slash, your other tank must taunt immediately. Fusion Slash also places a 1-minute debuff on the tank, during which you should not tank. Secondly, we have Summon Ball Lightning. This summons elementals on random raid members that need to be AoE'd down. They deal damage within 6 yards of their spawn point, so your raid should stay spread out until the ball lightnings are out, then stack up in melee to make it easier to AoE them down. His last ability is Lightning Whip. This is a great cone on the ground. After a few seconds, the whip will crack and instead create a lightning bolt on the ground. If a raid member is in the whip while it cracks, they will likely die. The remaining lightning bolt does damage if somebody stands in it, but if necessary it can be crossed without fatalities. It can also be jumped over to avoid the damage. In this phase we got the static shock and bouncing bolt conduits to about 80 energy, and then leveled up the overcharge conduit twice. This does mean you will get a lot of overcharges and they will deal a lot of damage, but to us it was preferable than the other 2 options. After the conduit has leveled up once, you will get 2 overcharged at once. That means when the timer for the conduit ability is up, your entire raid must be stacked in the exact same spot in melee range, or else everybody will get stunned. At 30% health, Lei Shen will trigger the second intermission. Again, he'll move to the middle, become untargetable, and overcharge all 3 leftover conduits. Since overcharge is potentially deadly during intermission, your entire raid must make sure to be in their quadrants as soon as the intermission triggers. That means that people that have to run to a quadrant far away should start running a little early. This should be called out by your raid leader at about 32 or 31% health, depending on your DPS. Since you do not have to deal with the fusion chain during this intermission, your team members should stay stacked up except when they have to move to intercept the bouncing bolt. Also keep in mind that since one conduit is disabled, the team that previously was in that quadrant must now split up to other quadrants. If you get 2 overcharges in one quadrant and are not stacked up, it can easily mean a death. Quadrant teams should also make sure to stick to the insides of their quadrant whenever possible, since overcharges at the edges can affect other quadrants and stun raid members far away, which is always bad. After 45 seconds, Lei Shen will become active and disable the overcharged quadrant. This is largely irrelevant except for the fact that the quadrant will now be inaccessible and leave your raid with half the platform to move on. All conduit abilities are disabled in phase 3, but to make up for that, Lei Shen now uses Thunderstruck, Lightning Whip and Ball Lightning, and also gains 2 new abilities, Overwhelming Power and Violent Gale Winds. Overwhelming Power is a tank switch mechanic. With every melee hit Lei Shen deals, he'll place a stack of a debuff on the tank that makes him take additional nature damage every second for 8 seconds. This stacks up fairly quickly and your tanks will want to trade off tanking a lot in this phase. Our tanks traded off at about 10 stacks. Violent Gale Winds is the most annoying ability in this phase. For 20 seconds, wind will deal damage and push your entire raid into one direction. It's not as strong as, say, Jikun's wind for instance, but it's still fairly tough to walk against it. More importantly, it inhibits casting as you're consistently moving. Violent Gale Winds has a 30-second cooldown timer, which means you only get about 10 seconds in between winds where you can move and cast freely. It also places a stacking debuff on each raid member that increases damage taken by Violent Gale Winds by 3% per stack, so effectively it acts as a softened rage timer. Even more annoying, Thunderstruck and Lightning Whip can and will happen during the Gale Winds, so your raid must be ready to creatively move out of them, factoring in the downdraft. Gale Winds can theoretically push you off the platform, so your tanks should attempt to keep Lei Shen in the middle of the two leftover quadrants to give your raid the most room to move. The intermissions in Phase 3 are certainly the hardest parts of this fight. Once your raid has had enough practice at the intermissions and has seen Phase 3 a few times, the final boss in this instance should fall. Overall, it's a very fun end boss, though there's certainly a lot to learn and memorize. I'm putting a link to the whole encounter into the video info in case you want to see how we dealt with the various mechanics in detail. Good luck and have fun!